Welcome to another episode of Sawdust Nation Podcast, the 135th episode. If you enjoyed the $500 shop, you're going to enjoy this episode. But first, let's get into who's joining us tonight. We have myself, North Country Woodworking, Josh, Nap from Nap's Naughty Works LLC, Nap, and then Nick from MPG Creations. So like I was saying, if you like the $500 shop, well, this is a take on that. We're continuing that series with Jigs. So the tools we bought during that episode, we're going to go ahead and talk about some of the jigs we would use, we would make to just kind of make our projects that much better and help run the shop. Because, you got to get jiggy with it. So if you recall, we have done jigs before, but this is just a little bit different. So we're going to go ahead and start off with Nick and see what his take on his jigs from his $500 shops are.
Okay, so just keep in mind, I make a lot of stuff. Smaller items for military members. So first off, my first jig that I would have to make would be the table saw sled. Right, that's a must for any shop, and you can make it at home. You don't even need to have all the fancy schmancy T-track and all that in there. You can make it straight out of plywood, bare bones. Maybe get some paste wax, stick it on the bottom. And, you can cut your was it the T-slot for the table saw out of plywood, or you can cut it out of hardwood or use plastic. I prefer to use plastic, but CA glue it to the bottom of the table saw sled. But helps you get square cuts that are repeatable, especially if you put stops in there. Now, if you start adding things like, let's say an MDF in the inside, as well as T-track, and you have clamps and all that in there just to give you some more longevity with it, give you some more diversity with what you can do with it. It'll only benefit you, but you could start off with your basic and then build it up from there. I know that Jonathan Katz Moses made one on YouTube, and that's where I got the idea to do my old one. And I still don't have a new one, and I wish I had the old one, but it doesn't fit my new table saw. So anyway, I digress. So we have the table saw sled. I also picked the Incra iBox jig. It's $234 roughly, and it's one of my go-tos for making finger joints. I think they look super neat, and once you get it dialed in, you can't go wrong with it. Unless you're doing larger boxes, then you're going to have to make some sort of jig yourself. And then I'm skipping over to, this isn't really a jig per se, but for $200 at Rockler, you can get the portable drill guide. So it eliminates the need for the majority of the small things you're going to need a drill press for. If you need to make sure you have a 90-degree angle when you're drilling with a drill bit, that would be one of the must-haves. I get it's kind of expensive, as well as the iBox jig. It's not cheap. However, it will last. I've had mine for almost 2 years now, and it looks brand new. It operates like it's brand new, easy to use, super easy instructions. Comes with a chuck key for your drill because it has its own chuck. But yeah, all you need is a drill already. So I think we already covered. In my shop, I purchased a drill or a driver or something like that. Or maybe I didn't. But, since then, I probably picked one up.
Yeah.
And that's the big three I had. So I know you can make a table saw sled for $100 or less, depending if you're, frugal with your materials. If you had $200, you can make it one. So we're staying around the $200 price range for me per jig, and that's where it's at. My last item I made was for flag boxes to put military flags or American flags in for fallen military members. You have to get a 22.5-degree angle on the table saw, and you can do it. You have to stand at that means you have to cant the blade over to 22.5 degrees and stand the edge of the board up and run it through against the fence. Now, If you don't have a jig for that, it's super dangerous and very inaccurate. Once you build the jig, which you can find on YouTube, super easy to make out of scrap wood. I made mine, and I've used it a bunch of times already. So that's it for me. Those are the 4. 3 are around $200, and the last one was out of scrap wood. So what about you, Nap?
You stole one of mine, but real quick, if you recall, my shop, I didn't have a table saw. I didn't have any cool stuff. I didn't have a router because I was dumb, and for some reason didn't put that on my list. But we'll just say I had a huge payday, and I was able to get a table saw, and I was able to get a router. All right, cool. All right, so let's say, I've been working at this for a few months, making like flags and stuff like that, because flags, you don't really need much of a jig for. If I was making simple, like, I don't know, Etsy things that only require the tools that I had, then sure. But let's say I made enough money and I got, let's say, Nick's Ryobi table saw, because, hey, why go super expensive when I'm still trying to, stay fairly cheap for the shop? And then also bought, like, let's say, we'll call it a Makita palm router, not even a full 2.5, horsepower router. Okay. So that last jig that Nick mentioned, that 22.5, I just call it the 22.5 degree jig. So it's a 65, right? It's like a 67.5 degrees, because Nick, unless you have like some special thing that goes 22.5 degrees, damn, that's one crazy ass angle on a table saw. But I know what you're talking about. So if anybody hasn't seen said jig, it's essentially it's two boards butt up against each other. It's almost like a half lap almost, but you don't put the rabbet. You just glue it and pin nail it at a 90 degree. And it's got 2 45 degree supports that hold it up. And then just like Nick said for his table saw sled, you have like that little tracking at the bottom. You do the exact same thing. The only difference is you slide this 90 degrees right up against your blade so it's touching. And then you go ahead and secure that to your tracking. And then you drop your table saw to 67.5 degrees, clamping and even maybe installing some kind of like stop block or fashioning the clamp in such a way that keeps the board from kicking back. Because as Nick said, if you don't have a jig for this, first of all, it's super dangerous, but it still can be pretty dangerous even with the jig. So if you're not like careful as to how you set it up and how you clamp things, that board can get away from you, and it's just not going to end well, especially because that is a very, very tight angle. Now, mind you, let's say you don't make that jig or you don't have a table saw. There's other ways you can do that. You can do the 45s all around with just a flat board on the bottom, meeting at the edge there, and then just putting like a face on or something like that. Like that also works. Just different options to have. But other jigs that I had, so if we're buying jigs, Nick and I both have the iBox jig. It was my go-to after my first jig that I made, and that was a router jig for finger joints. So I remember looking up on YouTube. I don't remember exactly who it was because it wasn't like a big name. It was just a random jig I found online, and I looked up box joint jig because I was like, I really want to make box or finger joints, because that's what a box joint is, a finger joint, or also known as finger joint. And I was like, how in the hell do I do this? So there was a bunch of different ways, a bunch of ways that were just not economical for me at the time, or at least I felt comfortable with, except for this one. So it's, again, made out of plywood. Most jigs are made out of plywood because they're relatively cheap, as Nick was saying. I made like it's like bench top secured with 2 clamps at the bottom. So it would be 1, 2, 3. Yeah, we'll call it three boards at 90 degree, again, just butt jointed up and screwed in. On the top board, okay, there's a hole for your router bit to come through, as well as big enough for the chuck for it, because sometimes if you go too far up and it rubs, just kind of prevents that. But also, putting bracing and supports around so that way when the router and stuff is secured to your table, it doesn't move anywhere. But then also using like the logic of a table saw sled. So you would make like a small sled that goes over this, I guess, made box. It's really hard to explain. I wish I had it still. It was in San Antonio. Obviously got rid of it. It's not here because I got the Incra iBox jig. But essentially the end of it was I made a keyway out of hardwood. I fastened that keyway to my makeshift backstop. And literally I would put the 1/4 inch bit in. I'd run it. Oh, Spindle says, continue when Spindle is up to speed. It is up to speed. Go. I have a job going in the garage right now, and I hear it like ever so slightly, the little whining of the spindle. But anyways, so you push, you would start with, it butted up against the key, just like you would with any other jig or any box jig. Run the first pass, and then you just kind of shimmy it over, back in and pushing it back and forth. I wish I had a video of this. Maybe I'll remake one so that way people can see what I'm talking about. Very hard to describe. The third one, I wouldn't call it so much. Let's see, did I even have a third one? No, so I had iBox jig, 22.5 degree. Oh, miter jig, or the miter box, the Incra miter gauge. So again, if we're buying jigs, that one has been, I would say, a lifesaver. It's also very much like the Harvey compass and any of those other really nice miter jigs out there. I don't really know which one's cheaper because I went straight for the miter gauge because that's all I knew about until I saw Nick's Harvey compass. Yeah, that's what you had, right, Nick?
I have the compass. I used to have the Incra.
Yeah. I don't know. I just went straight for the Incra miter gauge. One could be better than the other. I really don't know because I haven't had the other one.
You have the Incra, right?
Yeah.
That was my old one. So I'm going to say the Incra's better.
Okay.
Haters going to hate
that?
Because there's more positive stops on the actual gauge itself, where the cog's at. With the Harvey, you have to line up the lines. There are positive stops, but not as many. And if you're trying to get that in between angles, it's
Gotcha.
not going to have a positive stop for that. So, the quality is going to be about the same, right? You're just getting one that's shinier than the other, and the other one's matte. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But that, and I don't know where Incra's made, but I know Harvey's made not in the United States. So
the Incra's pretty stout. I mean, don't get me wrong. It took the saw stop, and the saw stop obviously did its thing, but it barely nicked that sucker, and it didn't really do a whole lot to the miter gauge. But yeah, so that's another gauge that another jig that I use. I mean, I've also made more simpler jigs, like, for example, for my coasters, I have like a 4x4 jig that I throw through the table saw that I just go boom and boom. Like, there's no real measuring. It's just throw it in this thing and send it type deal. And I mean, I've got other jigs for some of the other stuff, but in my $500 shop, those are really the main things that I would use. I mean, you said table saw sled, Nick. I tried that once until I bought your Delta table saw way back when, and I actually got said router or table sled from you. And then I sold that to another maker who's now also has that table saw sled. It was pretty beefy. I can tell you, I could not figure out how to make the table saw sled to save my life. Like, I made it, but I couldn't get it to be accurate. It was just super annoying. Like, you would make one adjustment on the back, and it would just be completely off. And I'm like, okay, I'm over this. I'm done. And that's when I just said, screw it, and got the miter gauge because that has stops on it. So, but yeah, that's really all the jigs I use. I don't really have a whole lot right now because a lot of the jigs I use are either for my CNC or for my laser. And, well, I don't have those in my $500 shop yet. So, Josh, what jigs you got, man?
So I took this in a much different road than you guys did. I went with basically low budget, what I can make in the shop. So none of the jigs I have on my sheet here are things I went and bought, but created on my own through plans online or ideas or just YouTube videos, what have you. So I started off with the table saw because, well, the table saw, as you progress, will realize one of the bigger tools in your shop that you're going to utilize for a lot of your fine cutting. Plus, I don't have a miter saw or anything like that, so it just made sense to me. And the first thing I made was a crosscut sled for which all three of us have mentioned. And those are great for like small parts, cross cutting. And you can even do some angle cuts on there as well. And then with that, things that I necessarily haven't made, but if I was going to stick with that table saw, and mind you, I got the rigid, I would make a tapering jig, which allowed me to do, table legs or taper cuts in general. The miter sled, a jig, which basically give me that 45-degree cuts. Not really necessary, but you can make them no problem on there. Good for like doing any kind of framing or anything like that. But one of the biggest ones I would make is called the joiner jig, which essentially helps you get a straight edge on a non-straight board. And then you can turn that board around and bring it back through the table saw, allowing you to joint both ends of the board. So that being a pretty important thing to do when you're woodworking and creating things like I said I was going to make, like cutting boards and whatnot. So that would be definitely something I make right away. If you started doing any kind of joints, you could do the tendon jig, half lap jig. You could do the figure joint jig, the dovetail jig. All could be made within your workshop. There's a bunch of plans online, and basically with this, you can use pine for the most part, or just use plywood, which I would stick to the plywood because it's straight, flat, and easy to get a hold of. You could buy half sheets or full sheets depending how you want to rip those up and actually make your jigs. And then one of the last ones was a thin rip jig or a spline meter jig. The angle jig is on there, but we already mentioned that. And with some of the leftover plywood, I would try to create some kind of alfie table just so that I have some kind of surface. So when I push larger objects through, I'm able to kind of utilize something. So with that, I kind of rolled into my bandsaw because I did buy a bandsaw. I believe it was 10 inches. And with that, I could be doing other stuff like cookies. I could be doing resawing, and there are some jigs that could help you out with that. So I went and, I thought about it, and a lower fence. A lot of times you're cutting a fence, it's a little higher, and your upper guide will actually hit it. And anything smaller than that, it's, you want the upper guide as close to the material without hitting as possible. And a lower fence, a smaller fence for smaller pieces would definitely allow for that. Again, a small alfie table that I could probably just use between the table saw and the bandsaw, something, that's jig where I can go back and forth, would be preferable. That way I don't have to spend more money than I, can afford. There's a log mill jig. They help with essentially, like I said, the cookies, taking raw pieces of wood that have been, drying out in the shop for a couple of years and go ahead and cut some boards with that. Good for like boxes and stuff. Like you can get some really beautiful pieces out of these, dried material. So then I thought about I got a router. Router's very versatile in the shop, right? So yeah, I took some time looking at some jigs, and definitely something that I've done in the shop is make a circle jig. Very easy. Make a large circle, and if you make it adjustable, you can make different size circles. And that can come in handy, especially when you start going into making circle cutting boards or, small tables or what have you. So then I kind of went back to the beginning of my journey, and I remembered I made a longer edge guide that came with my router. The edge guide that came with my router only allowed me to extend it like 6 inches. And so I made like a 1.5 foot one that was adjustable so that I could go ahead and use the router and get straight lines. There are a couple different ways to go about that. You can go ahead and actually make a fence, and you can do it like that. I wasn't that smart when I started woodworking. I didn't know you could do that, or I didn't even come to mind. So, the jig I made worked perfectly fine. It took a little extra brain bits, but I got there. And then with the alfie table that I made that fits both my table saw and my bandsaw, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to drill a small hole in there that fits my router so I can make a small router table and utilize that as such. Why not? There's also a dado jig you can make, and then different router bases for the different projects you might accomplish. Bigger bases, to do finer stuff. Even you can do some joinery with it as well. But in all this, I did make a couple push sticks with the bandsaw to help me with the table saw and the bandsaw, because, I have those already in my shop and I utilize them. And all in all, with these three tools, I have multiple, with these jigs as well, have capability to do a lot of different things. And, doing the math, depending what plywood in your area is, it could be anywhere between $65 and $100. But say you got a full sheet, you got some acrylics, so you could do some router bases or whatnot, and you got some hardware. So it could be like, less than $200. You could build all these jigs, outfeed table, and, basically get by. So when I was at the hardware store, I did pick up something small. I picked myself up a cheap drill. It's a Roby. I didn't have that in my first listing, but that's going to help me progress in the shop and do some of the joinery with the Craig jig that I purchased last time. So that's kind of like how I put that together. That way I can continue my journey in, the $500 shop series. I think with these, I could definitely, create quite a bit of projects and set myself apart. Some things are the same, some things are different, but, I think we all had some good points there.
Well, somebody said last time we did this, the $500 shop, somebody said a Craig jig already. So
I did.
Yeah, that's one of the first jigs that anybody should ever have.
Yeah, I did, but I didn't have a drill. So I bought a drill this time so I can go ahead and utilize that.
Yeah, I can say that off the rip, as far as when we first made our $500 shop, I wasn't even considering jigs at the time when we were talking about making the shop. Because to be honest with you, when I first started my shop, I didn't even know what the hell a jig was. Like, I knew what it was, but as far as woodworking is concerned, I never was like, oh yeah, you make a jig for that. I'm like, what the hell is a jig?
Well, jigs come out of necessity, right? So you make a jig because you don't have a capability to do it with a particular tool, or it's dangerous or whatnot. So that's where jigs come into play. So I could do joining with my table saw. I could do more with my router. I could do more with the bandsaw. You're pushing the limits of the tool in a safe manner to make sure you can utilize it, to its full extent. That way you're not buying specialty tools left and right. So you can maintain your budget and still do some of these projects that, people with a full-fledged shop can.
Mm-hmm.
So what's crazy is there's some jigs out there like I never would have even considered because I'd always have the tool, at least when I've progressed. One of those tools was a joiner. So I had a tabletop joiner, and I had the thing dialed in pretty good. But out there right now, even on like the cheapest contractor table saws, there's people making joiner jigs on their table saws. So if like you, let's say, don't want to buy a $300 bench top or $700 used, standing joiner, I never really considered that because I never thought a table saw to be, we'll just say perfect square. But I mean, I've seen some people do some things with, that table saw jig, a joiner jig on a table saw. And I can tell you, it's pretty damn close.
Oh, you can get spot on. You can get really spot on. Personally, I try to get mine as close to 90 as possible, but I mean, that's how I did my joining before I had my joiner. That's definitely one of the major jigs that I would make for this shop. I still have a joiner jig in the shop, so when I do any kind of slabs, I could produce at least one side that's perfectly, flat, flush, and ready to go, so I could flip that around and produce some lumber out of it. It's very possible. You could definitely do it without the joiner.
If you had a track saw, you could do the same thing.
Yeah,
sure.
And I mean, I'm not saying it's but it's going to cost you, if you get a Wen, maybe $300. I know we're talking about building jigs for our existing stuff, but I also feel like a dado stack is in a way kind of a jig for us because it creates rabbets and mortises and stuff like that that are a lot wider than what our normal blade would cause. You have your 8-inch or 1/8 inch kerf normally on your saw blade, but now you can go up to like a full inch. That's a game changer, dude.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. First of all, a spinning stack of blades still scares the ever living out of me.
Even when you soft top, do you have a soft one for your soft
I have
top?
the brake. I have everything. One, it's not necessarily like, okay, it scares me because one, I don't want to accidentally nick something because I don't want to set a saw stop off with a dado stack in it. I just don't. It sounds like it's going to be a hell of a lot worse than a single blade. Because a single blade was just a thump. A dado stack ain't going to be just no thump. It's going to be a lot more than that, I feel.
Times 10, essentially.
Yeah.
Times
And,
whatever
like,
blades
actually,
you had to put in there.
Yeah, actually crapping myself would be a thing. I'm pretty sure.
I don't know. I believe like going off the $500 shop, I'm trying to be realistic with it. When you first start, you're not going to have a lot of in the budget to buy tools. I mean, like
No.
I did not. Because you're not taking it seriously. You're out there, you're making some stuff, maybe selling some stuff. And like to go to your wife and be like, hey, I'm going to take $300 and buy this jig or buy this or buy that. Wasn't really a thing. I definitely, and I didn't even know, to be honest with you, a track saw. I didn't know about that until later on. That was something that I saw a couple times. I'm like, what is that? That's cool. I made my own track saw with my circular saw. Made a jig for that, which you can do, which was definitely helpful. There are definitely videos out there on YouTube that you can watch to get that, accomplished. Did it work? Absolutely. Was it perfect? Yeah. But it did the job. Craig has a jig for that too. Craig jigs are pretty good. They have a lot of jigs out there that can help you do tasks that are just tedious. Like I bought the jig for doing holes for bookcases. Pin jig, I guess it's called. They got ones for drawers. They have ones for like all different types of hinges and stuff like that. If you're just starting off,
would you consider?
Go ahead.
Would you consider a biscuit joiner a jig?
No, I mean you can do the same with a router.
You could do this. You could do the same thing with a drill bit and dowels.
Yeah, I mean like
just biscuit joiner makes it a heck of a lot easier. Just as let's say now this is not in the $500 shop. This is called the 500 plus tool, a fest tool, a domino.
It's like 1,000 plus.
Yeah, that's like the cost of the shops that we talked about.
Sell your shop, give the fest tool, and just let it sit in your shop because that's
Well, I was just wondering because it does provide. I don't know, man. It is a tool, but what else are you going to use it for? Yeah, but I do too. Well, what else? Mine's a Ryobi too, by the way.
Mine's Porter cable, I think.
Mine's a DeWalt, I think. I don't even know if I have it anymore, to be honest. I think I sold that too. Because I never use it. Like, it just...
Yeah. Well, I mean, we've learned different ways to go about doing stuff too. I mean, like, okay. So, I think we talked about this. Go ahead.
Should you sell your tools you don't use anymore?
It depends. Because, for example, the biscuit joiner, I literally used it maybe 2 or 3 times. And its sole purpose is for alignment. It is not for stability. Whereas one could argue, let's say the Festool domino, it might have a little durability because those dominoes are 1 thick and 2, they're about 1/2 inch, on each side. But we're not talking like, 300 pounds durability, but they're meant for alignment. And I have found other ways to align things. And typically I'm not looking to do an exact alignment on most things I make anyways. And I don't make furniture, so furniture's typically like, tables and stuff. That's what you use a biscuit joiner for, is to try to align like panels and things like that for that kind of thing. But besides that, I never really used mine.
Selling tools are kind of tricky. I mean, you have to really know what you're trying to achieve in the shop before you sell that tool. Like I said, I have a biscuit joiner. Do I use it often? No. I also stopped making large pieces of furniture in the shop. I said no. Anyone that comes at me with I want a table and chairs, I pass it.
Come at me, bro.
I've learned the hard way, and the way my shop is set up, I don't have the room or the time to do large projects. in this other projects, that are fairly large, they take up enough space, and I can't really produce other projects when I'm doing it. I'm not going to get rid of it because eventually I like to get back into making tables. So maybe when I get a bigger shop, I could do that. But I do have some old drills, D-wall drills, that I will be getting rid of. They're the old battery style. I don't use them anymore, and they've been in the drawer for almost a year now. So they're taking up space. I don't plan on taking them out or using them. I already have a replacement for them, so they will be leaving the shop. It's like the circular saw. I will be selling that as well. I don't use it. I have a track saw. I have, my table saw and other methods to cut. I don't foresee me using it. And if I do, I'll buy a cheap one for $30 and sell that too. Selling tools is tough. It's like your jig from Rockler, the drill one. I forget what it's called. I wouldn't sell my my drill press if I got one of those until I was absolutely sure that could replace it in every way possible. So I mean, it's really up to the individual and what they're doing.
All right, so real quick, just to rewind. So Ben in the chat says Crisscross makes a ton of jigs and has how-to videos. And did I mention a lot of them are made on his Axiom CNC? Ben is partial to Axiom because he has an Axiom. But yes, a lot of folks that make jigs in the maker community, and they don't even sell them for really an arm and a leg, but they make them on their CNC, so you have very precise jigs, especially for the starting maker. And then Jason hits us up in the chat here and says, donate to new maker and help them get started. I mean, when I sold, the biscuit joiner isn't really much of a tool to get started with. That's kind of like intermediate. I'm using it to, again, align things. But when I sold it, I practically donated it because, but yeah.
What's the last tool you sold?
Do we count CNCs?
Yes, a tool.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I sold my Shapoka. That's the last thing I sold.
What about you, Josh?
I don't know. I don't think I've sold a tool here in quite a while. I can't remember the last tool I sold. I don't think I have. Wait, no, track saw. So Amazon sent me, I ordered one track saw.
Oh man. Yeah. That was a while ago.
Yeah, that was a long time. So basically, long story short, if you haven't heard the story, I ordered my first track saw off Amazon, ordered extra track with it. It got delivered. 2 days later, I got another one delivered with the additional track. And so I had now 2 track saws and 2 tracks. I went and talked to Amazon. They're like, well, you can pay to send it back. I'm like, well, I'm not paying to send it back. You want it back, you got, pay the, shipping. They're like, just keep it. I'm like, you sure? I got to keep the additional track saw and track. And then I sold it to Pete up at Petrie's workshop.
Pete was our first guest on the show. Remember that?
Yes, I do.
Well, besides me.
Well, yeah, you were the original for the baby episode, which I have tried to look back through the records and grab. But the problem with the audio is there's only AJ talking. For some reason, I can't find our side. So it would be episode of AJ awkwardly pausing and responding.
We should take AJ's audio and just dub in some wild stuff and have him respond to it and make it.
I'm sure you would love that.
Yeah.
That'd be pretty funny.
That would be hilarious, wouldn't it?
That'd be a lot of work. But audio was horrible back then too. So I just, unfortunately I can't find both pieces to that puzzle because Nick was actually in my kitchen or kitchenette, whatever. We're on the same mic. And then there was AJ in Northern Jersey. So.
But the first episode that I showed up on, actually if you go back through the records of on our Buzzsprout, is the was it the Marketplace Savvy or was it? Yeah, it was Marketplace Savvy.
Yeah, that's where we found out you were a shark.
We talk all about
the Marketplace.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you want some advice on how to get things off Marketplace, just go back to that episode. We all went full ham on that.
Oh, yeah, for sure. For setting up a shop, looking for jigs, you guys pointed out you could buy pretty much every jig. You can make pretty much every jig yourself. There are plans. There are people selling them. You type it in, and your first link is going to be something like how to build the jig, or buy this jig. I mean, like, it ain't hard. It's not a tough sell for a lot of people just because, well, it helps, produce things in the shop. Some jigs you can't buy that I'm aware of, like the angle jig that all three of us use for the flags that we produce, flag boxes, holders, whatever you want to call them. That's not something I'm aware that you can buy, but it's easy. It takes like 5 minutes to make once you get the idea of it.
Sorry, I'm talking to another maker right now who's asking about CO2. Well, he's talking about laser advice, and he's got a diode. And he goes, hey, I'm doing maple, and it's light. What do I do? I said, well, you can decrease your interval, and it'll get a lot darker. He goes, all right, yeah, cool. So he did that. He goes, first one was 2 hours, and it looked good. And he's like, how do I make it even darker? I was like, what's your interval? And he told me, and I was like, well, put it to this. And he goes, holy crap, it's 3 hours. What the heck? I'm like, on a dial, man, it's just how it is. Time to go for a CO2.
Yeah. Dials are great for small projects, but once you start getting into large projects, I did a 14-hour laser one time, and the power literally died in the house during it. I was able to go through the G code, figure out where it died, and actually pinpoint and tell it to start at that location. But it was very painful. It took me at least a couple hours to figure that out.
A little squirrel moment there, but hey, Jason puts in there, what's the best material to make your jigs, such as a table saw sled?
Plywood. Use for the runners any kind of plastic, like cutting board plastic, the white stuff. You can also do hardwood. I would not do a softwood because it can expand, contract, and break. I like using my scrap walnut. That's because I don't like getting rid of walnut, so it lives on in my jigs. Yeah, every time I burn walnut, I cry a little. No, I mean, plywood, absolutely. The stuff is flat, it's straight, it's easy to work with. It's not cheap nowadays, but I mean, you're probably, if you're working with it in your shop for any means, you're gonna have scraps and you can produce a jig with it.
Okay, not just any plywood. The best you can get would be Baltic birch, 3/4 inch Baltic birch. And then what I would do personally, I would use now, like me now, not me before. I would use MDF, and I would also like cut it in strips so I could put T-track inside that. What?
I'm laughing because Jason goes, you what? Like in all caps. He's yelling at Josh right now because Josh uses walnut for his runners and things. And that walnut lives forever on in his jigs.
I can go get one of them.
But also, he might even said you what when it came to burning the walnut. Because I think that hurt a little bit more, was the burning. Not so much the using, but the burning.
My shop is small. If I can't utilize a piece of wood, it goes into the fire. I save the pieces I know I can use, but there are just some that just you're not going to do anything with. So,
as long as it's a Viking burial,
Absolutely. I don't just throw it in the trash. It goes the honorable way. I even have a small, bow and arrow I light, and I just.
So I was actually sitting here thinking about Viking burials because I'll talk about it closer to the end of the episode because I have a little bit about my shop. There's been stuff that's finally happened. I did things, but anyways, see, that's it. I'm done with the show. And what's the good news, Ben? Yeah, what is that? I'm curious.
Snap pregnant.
I am. He goes, what? No.
Did Nick come
not
visit
really.
you?
That's not a thing. Yeah, Nick came and visited me, and we're having wood babies together.
That's what you thought. He poked holes in that.
What? I wore safety glasses.
Oh yeah. So we haven't talked in a minute, guys. So Ben Warren. We talk about these shops. He has a really fancy CNC. So Ben, I'm sorry, you don't count, bud. You had a really fancy CNC, but he got himself an Omtech, boys.
I heard.
No, I did not hear that big news.
He got himself.
That's
I think
awesome.
you got yourself an 80 watt, didn't you? Because I know you were going to get yourself a used one, but then you realized, like, wait, if I just buy this new one, it's not much worse in price. And I'm sure Miss Candy doesn't know. Because if she knew, she make you sleep in the garage, make you sleep out in the shop. Did the Ether Bunny come visit? Yes, the Ether Bunny did come visit.
That's the other show.
But yeah, I'm really excited for Ben though, because Ben's been talking about getting a laser for a very long time. And I only say long time because, if you don't know this, Ben is like a guru at 3D stuff. Like he makes nice, beautiful 3D clockwork, all these things. I'll tell you what, if you need any 3D advice or help, Ben's your man. He literally helped me get that OSI badge shadow box in order, like to be able to cut that thing within a couple hours, which is pretty awesome of him. So she might hear you. She's probably listening right now, and maybe she's not. I don't know, but she secretly listens to the podcast. And when she finds out what I said, I'm sorry, Ben, you might get beat. I'll come find your body if you don't text me.
He put the model number in the chat, and I thought it was AFI. I'm like, what AFI?
You know you've Air Force too long when you think that's AFI. And Jason probably just vomited. Well, Jason just vomited probably a little bit in his mouth because, But yeah, so I think we about wrapped up Jigs. I know Jigs was kind of a shorter thing. So funny thing about Jig is like you can buy them. A lot of people know the bought versions of Jigs, but when it comes to making them, it's a lot easier to show a jig than it is really to, like, at least for me, to explain. Because some people know what the table saw sled is. Some people know what the, some people you probably know what I'm talking about with the router finger joint deal. But not everyone knows or has seen those things. Hopefully, if they listen to the episode, they might get on the old YouTube and just be like, what the heck was Nap even talking about?
Yeah, well, that's the hope, right? They learn something, they research it, and they figure out they could do that with their shop, with not including a $2,000 or $1,000 or whatever tool.
What's your favorite jig, Nap?
You know what? Because I do use it the most, I'd have to say my miter jig, or the miter gauge, miter jig, whatever the hell you want to call it. Now, let's say I went back, because like Josh was saying, like, yeah, I went a different route. He made all his stuff, from things. From like cheaper material right off the YouTubes and those things. If I could make a spline jig or make one of those 45 degree jigs like that had that's flat and it has the 45, the picture frame jig, that would be pretty neat. I think that those are two jigs I probably use the most because I do make a lot of frames for various things, which never thought I would, but I do. But currently, out of jigs I have, I'd have to say the miter gauge is my favorite, just because I can do nice 45 degree cuts. I have that stop block for when I'm doing other things. It's pretty solid. Micro Jigs have some designs of jigs. Yeah, they do. Micro Jig does have free designs on their page, and get jiggy with it, of course. But yeah, that's my favorite jig. What about you, Nick?
The Irish jig.
Sorry, back to you. Oh, you're stupid.
No, my favorite jig that I prefer to use a lot of would be the Incra iBox jig, which after you use it a couple of times, it just becomes so easy to dial it in, and you're just, you learn the tool and you can start messing around with different settings and stuff like that, and different size finger joints, and you can even use it on a router table if you have one. You don't have to just use it for a data stack on a.
So funny thing about that particular jig, Nick, is like you say, the amount of times you use it gets easier. Like for the longest time, I had a hard time with those micro adjustments on the left side of that particular jig, because I was like, which way am I supposed to move this shit to make it tighter? Which way do I move it to go looser? I couldn't remember. I had to watch the video like 6 times before I could remember which way to turn that little micro knob on the side to move the keyway left and right just ever so slightly.
Why did you just make a note?
Because I'm dumb, okay? And okay, I said it, yeah. No, but I only used it. So I used it once, and then like 4 or 5 weeks later, I used it again, and then I started making more boxes. Now, that went to a screeching halt. So that thing's been collecting dust for, I'd say, almost a year now. But yeah, I probably could have, and I should have, but I didn't. Should have, could have, would have.
It's just a no for, small things, something like that. I can't remember. There has definitely been tools in the shop where I have issues remembering which way turns this or just that. I just take a permanent marker, or I'll take a pen, whatever I can write on it with, and I'll just write an arrow, tighten, loosen, or whatever the case might be. saves a couple brain cells, and I don't have to think too much about it.
Saves a couple brain cells. That's solid.
But I mean, like that is what it is. But I mean, as far as my favorite jig in the shop, though, now to be fair, I've been using my miter gauge probably the most since I got my new table saw. But as far as jigs goes that I can make in the shop, the crosscut sled is by far one of my favorites. A good one can do wonders for a lot of things. For the trunk that I built, I actually did my miters on there. That I was big enough where I could put the panel on there and slide it across and do, beautiful miters on, which I could not do with my miter saw, and it would be very difficult to do with the table saw because I had nothing to reference for keeping it straight. So that came in clutch. Did I damage the crosscut sled that I have doing that?
Maybe.
Yeah, sure in the hell did. Do I have to make another one now? Yeah. But, I mean, like, it was worth it. That's what jigs are for. I mean, like, I know how to make it. I mean, they're not that expensive to make. And that's another good, thing to wrap in here is, like, with you making your own, you have to develop the skills to make it. You learn things along the way. And then you could always make it better as you go, or just make a better one. You buying a jig is great, and it comes with a ton of features, but that might be something there that you just don't like or use. And with your personal jigs that you make, you can make it any which way you want.
Hey, question, Josh. So, talking about damaging jigs, so table saw sled being like the number one that I think a lot of people jack up. It is if you are wasting walnut. She's not going to let you live that down. But
it's only the runners. It's not like it's the whole thing.
Right? So think of this. What if, because we, all three of us have CNCs, all of us have the capability, I think now, maybe not before. What if you made inserts for your table saw crosscut sled, like a 45-degree insert and a 90-degree insert?
I'm glad you brought that up. The microjig crosscut sled they have on their website does require you to purchase the microjig products to actually create some of these things. But I did, and I continue to use their products in my jigs. So that the hardware for it is not tied to one jig. I could actually move it and then create different things. And their crosscut sled they show you how to produce a crosscut sled to create the miter jig and different jigs within that, so that you can basically have a crosscut sled that does it all. So I support microjig all the way. I love their products. I don't use them as much as I used to, but they still are something in the shop that I go to when I'm in a pinch. Like if I do a crosscut sled and I need to hold something down and I forgot to put something there to hold it down, I just take my router with a dovetail on it, put a track in there. Now I got something I can use one of their hold downs, their clamps, whatever, and I got something in there I can utilize. So
hold it down, fam. Holding it down.
You gotta hold it down. I can say, folks. So just throwing a little extra stuff in here that isn't jig related. I caved. It's made. The Etsy is up and running.
Nice.
Oh, really?
I've only got 4 listings, but they have different variations.
Ooh, I'm
working on this 5th listing right meow. And Nick, you're gonna recognize one thing, but it's not the one we talked about. The one you said don't do. So I'm not doing it.
Why not? No, that's your Facebook. I don't want your Facebook.
Just go to my link tree. It's in there.
Naughty Etsy. Naps Etsy.
Naps Naughty Etsy, yeah.
Oh. Yeah, you're not going to get the hits and the sales that you want.
No. So I've had some views, but obviously no sales yet. And it's fine. I don't expect to get a sale the day after I set the stuff up, but there is some traffic, so I'm good with that. And then currently, this is what I was working out in the garage.
I don't see it. I don't see your Etsy. Sorry, it doesn't exist.
Oh, okay.
No, I got figure it out.
But yeah, I was like, all right, not getting the flow. Oh yeah, and I lost that awards job because they wanted metal work instead, and of course I don't do metal work. So
man, that sucks. I'm sorry to hear that, man.
No, but in all fairness, okay, I gotta say, silver lining here, 2, in fact. 1, if I was a maintainer, the wood stuff would have been cool, but these metal plaques that they're looking at, they're pretty BA. Okay, so I'm not gonna lie. If I was a maintainer, I would rather receive what they're looking at than possibly what I would have given.
As a maintainer, I would be happy to get anything.
This is true. That's also factual.
They could throw a dirty rag at me and be like, "Thank you, sir."
Yeah, but then the second silver lining is it's opening me up to just do more things in the shop. I mean, like I've literally made, so I got 3 tabs that I made, all different variations. 2 of them are still in work. One will be epoxy filled and the other one will just be painted, because all my tabs will have 3 variations. One's acrylic inlay, one is epoxy, and one's painted. And they're all the Special Forces tabs and any other tab you can think of other than one mentioned that a certain someone on the podcast makes exclusively, simply because there is intrinsic value to him of that. So I'm just not going to do it.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm looking at your cherry carved flags with the coin rack.
Yeah.
Nice. I like it. So how do I order one? Add to cart.
Yeah, and then you cancel the order.
Cancel right away.
Free shipping?
Yeah, for certain products it'll be free shipping.
Wow. Fancy schmancy, dude. Nice job.
The shadow boxes, though, that's where obviously. So I set my inventory to only allow like my 2 to 3 week lead time. The quantities that are on there, that was if, let's say, I got slammed right now with every job on there. That's what I can handle in a 2 to 3 week period.
What's it? I'm gonna order everything all at once.
Don't you effing dare!
I'm crashing this website, folks.
But yeah, so I finally did it. I'm not too happy because I caved, but it needed to happen regardless. Hopefully, I can get some orders. Don't need to get a lot, but just get some. I'm hoping to pick stuff up here shortly. It's just been super annoying.
Yeah, dude, that's awesome.
Yeah, I think it's been slow for everyone. I was actually talking to a few makers before the show and throughout the week. You know, there's a lot of people out there getting a little discouraged. Orders are slowing down. It's getting harder and harder to get in the shop. So I mean, they're all holding in there, but I mean, like, orders definitely been slowing. I did want to shout out to a maker around me, Willard's Custom Woodworking. I actually helped him go pick up a used rigid table cabinet saw that he found for $350, which is like half off. We bought it from a actual contractor around the area, and we actually sat there, talked a little bit. He actually started following the podcast and following all of us. So, you know, it's nice sometimes when you buy these used tools, you get to connect with other, not necessarily woodworking, but people that mess with wood. And I told him at some point in time, we might be interested in having a contractor on here to talk a little to something we might not know. So
I've never actually seen what my Etsy page looks like on a computer.
It's interesting because like there's like the sales version where you're trying to like set it up.
Yeah.
And then there's the other side of it. Yeah. To look at the other side of it, you actually have to search things on Etsy to find yourself. Yeah, hey, Nick. So this is what this one looks like. I jacked it up. I got to pull the acrylic out, but
that's acrylic.
Yeah,
I thought that was epoxy.
That's acrylic.
Okay. Looks good. Where'd you get your file, or did you make it?
No, I found it on Etsy. Out of all places, this was like almost a year ago. I was like, hey, maybe I'll try to do this, and then I bought them and never got into it. Yeah. And then finally, I was like, you know what? If he can do these and do well, I might be able to do these ones and do well. However, there's a lot of folks on there that make them, but they look like they're all out of plywood. So I'm like,
I see a lot of people make them, and then they like cut each piece out and then they paste it on. If you know what I'm talking about, or it's like glued on. It's not.
So these are glued on, but they're inside. So I had a piece of 1/4 inch, because a 1/4 inch pocket, 1/4 inch cherry. I lasered the letters out, put the plexi in, and then placed my letters.
Well, looks good, man. So when you're ready, Nick, let's go spin our sponsors.
Well, folks, we want to thank PWNCNC once again for being our primary sponsor of the podcast and making this episode possible. So check Daniel's workshop out at pwncnc.com, and if you're looking for that stuff and you want to throw it all in your cart and you need 10% off, use promo code Sawdust Nation 981, and that's 10% off your entire order. Likewise, thanks to Total Boat for their continued support. And if you want that 10% off promo code for the Total Boats, go ahead and slide into the Sawdust Nation Podcast DMs on Instagram or shoot us an email and we'll hook you up. Furthermore, I want to thank our affiliates, Makerstock.com, as well as OhmTech. OhmTech lasers, me and Josh use them, and Nat's got a hybrid. It's sort of like an OhmTech.
I want to be.
It's that grade A Chinesium, you know?
It's a foam tech.
A Photech.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm going to kick it on over to Nap now. Nap.
Yeah, folks. So, hey, check it out. If you listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Pandora, I think iHeartRadio might even have us on there. Any of those podcast catchers, go just give us 5 stars and let us know how we're doing. So give us feedback even if you give us those 5 stars. But if you don't give us 5 stars, let us know why even more, because guess what? If you don't give us that feedback, we can't give you the content that you deserve. But other than that, if you're trying to get a hold of us, Josh, how do they do that?
Hey, it's easy. If you have Instagram, go ahead and slide into our DMs. Either you want to get a hold of all 3 of us at Sawdust Nation Podcast on Instagram, or individually at Naps 90 Works LLC. Go ahead and DM him. You got Nick from MPG Creations. He's always available. And myself, Josh from North Country Woodworking. Always like to hear from people from the community and try to help out or, just talk shop. If you don't like social media, that's fine. You can slide into our email just the same way by contacting us at sawdustnationpodcast@gmail.com. With that, easy. Ideas for the podcast, topic ideas, questions. You want to do a voicemail so that we could play it on the podcast and answer your question? Even better. We love those and like to see more of those. If you really like the podcast and you want to be part of every recording, it's easy. Become a Patreon. Subscribe to the 3rd tier, which is, I believe, about $10. And you get a whole bunch of good stuff. Not only do you get to watch us record every episode and then physically see some of the products that we hold up and the gestures and some of the other stuff you might not hear, you get the full unrated version. You get a whole bunch of other stuff as well. Go check our Patreon. Try it for a month.
You also get extra entries into our live giveaways. So.
Yep. It's listed as Jelly of the Month Club. That's only for Patreon reasons. Anyway, so with that, let's do our final words, starting off with that.
So hey, check it out, folks. I know we've been going on this $500 shop, talking about jigs and things, but you know what? We've been doing this for for me, it's been 3 years. I don't know how long you guys have actually officially been doing the woodworking thing, but hey, we're here for you all. We're a part of this community. We will help you in any which way we can. And if we don't got the information, we probably know somebody that does, and we will put you in touch with them because that's the only way we become better makers and a stronger community. And hopefully we get to branch out more, especially with Workbench Con coming up. And we look forward to meeting all you amazing makers that we've followed and looked up to thus far. I'm going to pass on over to Nick. What you got, man?
All right. Like always, take care of yourselves and each other.
Thank you for listening to the 135th episode of Sawdust Nation Podcast, where we talk jigs created from our $500 shop. We appreciate you listening, whether it be you're making coffee on your way to work or at the gym or in the shop or outside on a walk. We don't care. We just want to whisper in your ear and talk shop. So get in your shops, go make some sawdust, and Sawdust Nation Podcast out.
Out. That joke's going to get edited out. I know it.
Yeah.
Has to.
Yeah.
I mean, we could.